COVID-19 has brought disruption to the globalized and interconnected world. Challenges of COVID have led the dark period both in terms of human suffering, but also the damage done to political and social fabric. But before the pandemic, globalization was already in retreat now. The trend looks set to accelerate. This is a diminished world in many ways that we're looking at. It's the world of globalization. From smartphone to toys, today's globalized trading system has grown to rely on long and complex supply chains. But the pandemic has played havoc with them. Clothing is one industry that has been hit hard work. $2.5 trillion. Globally, it employs over 43 million people in Asia alone. Chinese factories making buttons in zips shop during the pandemic, meaning the item didn't reach their next port. Factories in Bangladesh couldn't finish the trousers and cancelled orders in cotton suppliers in India. And lockdown hit demand in the West as customers weren't shopping on a high street in America. Clothing sales fell by 73.5% between March and April. This year in Bangladesh lost out on an estimated $3.2 billion from cancelled exports in just 6 months and across Asia. Millions of low-income workers were laid off. Goods taking long journeys from factory to the high street have become one of the signatures of globalization. The roots of today's heavily globalized world were put down and at the end of the Second World War, the Allied nations created a rule-based system for international commerce finance. This allowed companies, product science, and technology to move across borders. Then in the 1990s, the world entered an era of hyper-globalization, becoming more interconnected than ever before. COVID-19 struck a major blow to unfettered globalization. But before the pandemic arrived, globalization had already taken two other big hits. The first was the 2008 financial crisis, when cross-border investments, trade, bank loans, and supply chains shrunk. Globalization started to slow down a process known as globalization. The global enemies suffered, and those who had already lost out during a heyday of globalization felt even poorer. Opposition to the system grew. This desire to revive manufacturing and bring back dignity to workers spread across the Western world. A wave of populist leaders were elected across the globe, championing nationalist policies attacking immigration and existing global economy. A trade war blew up between world's two largest economies. For years, the West had accused China of flouting WTO rules, saying its trading practices were unfair to Western companies, but President Trump turned rhetoric into policy. Since the start of his presidency, tariffs on Chinese exports to the U.S. have increased sixfold. China hit back more than doubling its tariffs on its goods. The advent of the pandemic this year was the third big disruption to the globalization within the last 2 years. Globalization has sped up this year. The IMF forecasts that global GDP could fall by 4.9%. That is 50 times more than in 2009. The post-COVID world is likely to be a more fractious and regionalized one. In this era, the new player on the scene was China, which joined the World Trade Organization. It grew to dominate global trade alongside the United States. Multinational companies thrive, expanding into China and all over the globe. Multinational tried to navigate the challenges of pandemic The talk in the boardroom is increasingly about to be less global and more local. Some companies are ahead of the game. The Spanish clothing retailer Zara is the one of the most successful in clothing industry. And shorter supply chains have helped the many company weather the COVID storm, while most Western high street fashion brands have offshored manufacturing to Asia, where labor is cheaper. Distance equals time to retailers. Have to book orders 6 months in advance, and that time a lot of can go out of fashion. Sarah keeps its manufacturing base closer to home for its fashion lines, meaning you can take a design to the high street in a matter of weeks. The way doesn't stockpile inventory and can respond quickly to consumer trends. The pandemic has disrupted the movement of goods, people, and capital around the globe, but even without COVID-19, another pillar of globalization would be facing challenges. The flow of data across borders, the Great Wall of China, has been kept out the likes of Google and Facebook for years, and President Trump's recent attacks on TikTok and WeChat are deepening this internet between China and the West, and it's not just software. The decoupling of Chinese and American tech also extends to hardware. The unpicking of globalization may accelerate on a number of fronts irrespective of when COVID-19 is brought under control. And this could be bad news for developing countries such as India. The globalization boom allowed countries in Southeast Asia to rise middle income status, but the likes of India may miss out on this. And they're not the only people who stand to lose out from the globalization in rich countries like us. And Britain, those most in favor of reigning in globalization, could suffer the most. Solutions that don't work, like shut down the supply chain, build a wall, keep the immigrants out. I think the broader solution is to make interdependence work with resilience. That's the challenge that the global leaders face today. I am Cortaniel Teves, Bachelor of Science, Electrical Engineering 1. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to subscribe.